So are the Warhammer 40K 10th edition starter sets a good deal, and if so, which one should you choose? Let's talk through the savings and the positives and negatives of each. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking through the Warhammer 40K 10th edition starter sets. I thought we'd do a focus video to take a look at each one of them in turn, and how much value they might have to a new or returning player. Let's talk about the starter sets in general, then go through each one in turn and talk about some of the positives and negatives. So these 10th edition starter sets are kind of Games Workshop's recommended ways to jump into the hobby, mainly aimed at people who are new to the hobby or perhaps new to 10th edition 40k, and these ones feature subsets of the miniatures from the Leviathan box, Space Marines vs Tyranids. Obviously right from the start, if you're choosing to get into Warhammer 40k and you're not collecting either Space Marines or Tyranids, it means that these starter box sets probably aren't going to be for you quite as much. They both seem to be quite good factions for getting into the game at the moment, really quite large plastic ranges with more on the way. Plus with the existence of these starter sets and the recent Leviathan box set, they can be fairly cheap armies to collect at the moment at least. The offerings on these starter sets are an introductory set, a starter set and an ultimate starter set, all of which offer discounts compared with the contents that you'd buy individually from Games Workshop if you did choose to pick these up. This time round the starter sets are really quite different offerings though. The introductory set is kind of a mixed paints and miniature set, basically playing 40k out of one box. The starter set itself is a lot more miniatures focused if you just want to focus on the actual models for the Space Marines and Tyranids, and then the ultimate starter set also has some extras like terrain and a book. I'd also consider that there's a few other things that you could get. If you absolutely just want to dip your toe in the hobby, then you could pick up a starter paint set. There's the big Leviathan box, or you could start with a combat patrol set if you're starting another faction, and I'll mention those all briefly too. While we're on the subject of picking up Warhammer 40k miniatures cheaper though, I bear in mind that for a lot of countries around the world, you can get things a little bit cheaper than Games Workshop, say via going through third-party discount retailers, say Element Games in the UK or Gap Games in Australia, both of which have very decent discounts compared with what Games Workshop sells kits for, including these starter sets. I'll link those both down in the video description. Any purchases made through them do help to support the channel, as well as saving you a good chunk of money. Getting into the sets though, I thought for the actual main starter sets with Marines and Tyranids, it might make sense to work through from the very smallest up to the very biggest. Perhaps the smallest and lowest investment entry point in the Warhammer 40k hobby are the starter paint sets that they have, one for Space Marines and one for Tyranids, and these ones are £22.50, $35 or €30. In the set you get 3 Infernus Marines, or for the Tyranid one it's 3 Termagants and 1 Rippus one. One opposed plastic models that you don't need glue to assemble, they can just push fit into place. You get a starter paintbrush and a set of 6 paints that's slightly varied depending on which set you pick up. The Space Marine one has some Macragge blue to paint them as Ultramarines for example, as well as a white, a black, some Agrax Earth shade for a little bit of shading, plus an Armageddon dust paint to do the bases with a bit of texture. Compared with buying these exact things separately from Games Workshop, you'd expect to pay around about roughly £30 for the paints, brush, plus the miniatures, so theoretically it is a little bit of a discount compared with buying them all individually, but in reality I feel like there's multiple reasons where it's not really actually that great a deal. Infernus Marines are just very easy just to get cheap second hand. You can get entire squads of them for a small amount of money off eBay at the moment, at least in a lot of countries. That's via them coming in the starter sets, plus also being in Leviathan. The paintbrush is definitely handy to have. They certainly can pick up cheaper paintbrushes than Games Workshop ones elsewhere if you want to economise. Plus the paints might not actually be the ones that you want, unless you literally want to paint them up in this exact colour scheme, which is fine if you do. If you wanted to have, say, your Space Marines be of a different chapter though, say you wanted to paint them up as Dark Angels or something, then these paints are going to be less useful. I feel like as a result, the kit's a bit unhelpful for more established hobbyists, or people who are actually trying to build up a 40k collection towards an army. Just the overall value proposition doesn't really seem very good, but I would say it is good for someone who just absolutely wants to dip their toe into the hobby, paint some Warhammer with the absolute lowest investment possible, and to be fair I think that this kit achieves that out of just one box. I think it's a kit that's aimed at the experience of painting some Warhammer 40k miniatures for the first time, as opposed to really being one that's practically useful for getting an entire army together, though I guess it doesn't hurt. I would bear in mind that the Infernus Marines contained within aren't actually a legal squad in game. You'd need 5 of them, and with their new point system, they don't really work very well in terms of points for the models when you have bigger squads as well, so I guess that is something to bear in mind as well. Moving on, the next level up one is the 40k Introductory Set. This one's £40, $65 or €55, and basically takes the same concept a little bit further. You get 5 Infernus Marines, so enough for a full squad there, 10 Termagants with a bonus Rippus one, Just the 5 paints from this one, mixed between the Tyranids plus the Space Marine ones, is not really quite enough to paint them up, as you can see in the box art here. A paintbrush, some clippers, some dice, a little plastic range ruler, a gaming mat for an arty battlefield to play on, and a handbook with some introductory missions. If you add together what the paints, the brush, and the miniatures would all cost you altogether, you get around about roughly £60 from Games Workshop, so around about a 33% saving on that compared with the price that you pay for this box set overall, plus a few small random extras. Again though, it's a box set that doesn't really have amazing value on just the miniatures. You really do need to both want the miniatures plus the extras for them, and again it seems like a fairly good one-stop shop to actually get some miniatures together and get some paint on them, though in reality you probably need to pick up a couple more paints to actually paint them properly. Again, I'd say that this one is mainly angling for the same sort of market as the first one is, people who just want to paint up their first Warhammer miniatures, but aren't too unhappy to make a slightly bigger investment and actually get some usable squads on the table, to the extent where you could actually play some small games with them as per the mission handbook, just to give you a first taste of what Warhammer 40k is about. Again though, I'd say that this one is not really that useful for established collectors. Both the Infernus Marines and the Termagants are kind of easy to find in various other box sets or second hand off eBay. Plus it sort of depends on the paints actually being the ones that you want or need for the miniatures, which they might not be. Moving on though, now we're starting to get towards the bigger boxes. I think perhaps one of the best ones on this list in my opinion is the 40k starter set, £65, $110 and €85. This one actually gets you some little armies to go up against each other rather than individual squads, and while it doesn't come with paintbrushes and paints and things like that, I feel like that's not actually the worst thing in the world, as you can just pick those up separately and actually get the ones that you want, rather than Games Workshop's best guess at the ones that you'd like. This one again is Space Marines versus Tyranids. The Space Marine side of the box is 5 Infernus Marines, 5 Terminators, the big new chunky ones, plus the Terminator Captain, around about 400 points worth of models there, and generally quite nice recent plastic sculpts, even if they are monopose ones without any options. For the Tyranids, you get 20 Termagants, a Winged Prime, 3 Von Rhein's Leapers, and the big all-devouring Psychophage that likes to eat enemy Psychers, plus a couple of Ripper Swarms as well. In terms of usability for the armies, I'd say that literally any of the units are kind of usable in game. At the moment I rate the Winged Prime as a little bit underwhelming, could be alright though if you had some gargoyles to back him up. On top of that you get some similar sort of supporting stuff, some reference data cards and a handbook for getting the game going, and again a gaming mat for a surface to play on. I think my instincts are that this one's probably going to be the most popular out of the starter sets for a lot of people, as it really goes heavy on perhaps the most exciting bit of the box set, the actual miniatures. 5 squads of these, 1 monster and 2 characters really is not bad at all for £65 or $110 as Games Workshop goes. Typically, if you were to buy these individually as full multi-part plastic kits elsewhere, they might sell them for around about £225. So bought together in this starter set, you get around about 72% worth of savings. Pretty ridiculous compared with the normal, fairly high prices that Warhammer goes for. This box definitely feels like it's a good way to jumpstart a Warhammer 40k collection, whether you're playing Space Marines or Tyranids, and if you're only playing one of them and not both, it could be even better if you manage to split it with someone else, and just have the half that you want with a whole bunch of miniatures at good value. I'd bear in mind that the value of the box set is maybe slightly slanted towards the Tyranids. They do get really quite a lot more plastic, even if they get the same amount of points in game roughly. Overall, putting it together though, you can also look at it in terms of points per dollar. You get around 7.2 points per dollar out of the box set, even before you get any discounts from, say, third-party resellers. And again, that's far above typical values from Games Workshop. Overall, I think that the box set's very, very good, though I'd bear in mind that if you don't actually want the models from 2 different armies, might lessen the value a little bit, plus they are all monopose as well. Definitely not the worst if you're getting started, but say there might be a bit of trade-off compared with, say, waiting for the full multi-part plastic kit for the Terminators to come out and getting different weapon options there. I do think it's really quite a good deal though, really quite a nice entry point to get an actual small force of miniatures, and you can actually play some small games against them if you'd like to. I'd bear in mind that these don't quite get you the combat patrol forces for Space Marines or for Tyranids if you want to play that game mode. The Space Marines are missing a Terminator Librarian and the Tyranids are missing some Barb Gaunts, though you could pick up one or both of those individually if you'd like. It depends on how much you actually really want to play that game mode, I suppose. Moving on though, the biggest of the 40k starter sets is the Ultimate Starter Set. This one's considerably more pricey than the regular one, £125, $210 or €160, and this one's kind of similar to the regular starter set but adds in 4 different things: 1 rulebook, 1 set of terrain, 1 unit of Barb Gaunts, and that Terminator Librarian. Going through those in turn, the rulebook is a softcover core rules book for Warhammer 40k, Kind of handy to have a mini version of the book to quick reference in game if you'd like. You can download the exact same thing from a PDF online, but it can be kind of handy to have a physical copy of the book to leaf through if you need to. I think that is quite a nice extra. The terrain is perhaps the most expensive thing that they're adding in here. Games Workshop terrain does tend to be a little bit on the pricey side. This one gets you a hab bunker, so a blocky building, plus some stockades. Again, helpful enough for the terrain collection, I guess. I think that a lot of people would get some good value out of that if they're playing some games at home. Getting a table of terrain can be quite pricey, and I guess this is one way to chip away at that. Then for the Tyranids, it adds in those barb gaunts, really quite savage anti-infantry that can slow down enemies as well. And for the Space Marines, you get a Terminator Librarian, a little bit conflicting with the captain for a choice to lead the Terminator squad, as they can't both do so, but quite a cool miniature, and both of those together allow you to run the combat patrols for Space Marines or for Tyranids, which is quite a nice thing for picking up the big one, I suppose. When you add the rough cost of the miniatures together based on what Games Workshop would sell them for individually, again based on full multi-part plastic kits here, it'd be around about £330. Maybe a tiny bit less savings compared with the regular starter set, but I haven't included the softcover rulebook in that, which I think could be easily argued to account for the difference. Again, it definitely does have its disadvantages, monopose models and models from different armies that is a bit less focused if you were, say, just collecting Space Marines or just collecting Tyranids. And again, I would say that the Tyranids get more out of this than the Space Marines by a bit. They do get a lot more plastic, and their miniatures will cost more if sold separately. I feel again that this one will be popular, but it's maybe just a tiny bit more niche than the standard 40k starter set. I think to pick this one up, you kind of need to be getting value out of all the elements of it, to have good use for the mini rulebook, and actually want to get some terrain on the table as well, as opposed to just slant your purchases towards more miniatures for your army. Just to weigh up the opportunity cost, you could almost get 2 of the regular starter set if you wanted to get some really quite big armies on each side, compared with getting this one set, so you could get absolutely hordes of gaunts and 10 Terminators on the go if you wanted to. This one just definitely doesn't quite focus on the actual miniature armies as much due to the other stuff in the box. Finally, for the very big offering, I thought that we'd talk about Leviathan as well. This one was £150, $250 or €160, and was the launch box for 10th edition, though it is sold out in a number of places around the world at time of recording. You can't just go on Games Workshop's web store and order it, though there might be certain places like third-party resellers or other people reselling online. Games Workshop did sell an absolute ton of these, so it might not be impossible to land a copy if you can be a little bit creative. This one basically feels like it's doubling down on the 40k starter set vibe, another box that's very focused on the miniatures, though you do get the big rulebook and a mission deck inside as well. I have a feeling that if Games Workshop kept on selling Leviathan, it would probably outcompete the other starter sets for a fair few people. For the Marines, you get 10 Infernus Marines, 5 Terminators, the Terminator Captain and Librarian, the Apothecary Biologist, and a Lieutenant with a combi weapon, plus a Ballistus Dreadnought and 5 Stern Guard. The Tyranids get the same sort of contents as in their starter box, but also get the Screamer Killer Carnifex, the Neurotyrant with his little floating Neuraloid accessory brains, and another 11 Neurogaunts as well. It's around about 950 points worth of Space Marines, and around 850 points worth of Tyranids very roughly. So quite big forces on either side there. Adding it all together, it's a similar sort of value to the other starter sets, around about £620 worth of miniatures if Games Workshop might have sold them individually, that is including the book and the cards as well. So again, around about 75% savings compared with typical Games Workshop prices here, provided you like the miniatures of course. I'd say overall it's perhaps one of the best overall deals if you can find one to land a copy. Though of course does come with really quite a big entry price, and even if it is a good deal, a few people wouldn't want to drop $250 or £150 on Warhammer all in one go. Another way to utilise the deal though might be just to look at some of the individual units online. A fair few of these might go a little bit cheaper than Games Workshop tends to sell them individually. You can score Infernus Marines and Termagants for really quite cheap at the moment, for example. Could be worth checking out eBay for that kind of thing. Finally, while we're on the subject of box sets to start Warhammer 40k, I think it is just worth quickly mentioning the Combat Patrol box sets, as they're kind of the sets that you're most going to be considering for starting armies that aren't just Space Marines or Tyranids. These sets tend to be £95, $160 or €125, and these ones are purely miniature focused basically. Say for example, here's the Orcs one, it gets you 3 Death Copters, a Death Dread, 20 boys, and a Warboss in Mega Armor. If I was starting a faction in Warhammer 40k anew, I feel like I'd certainly be very tempted to pick up their Combat Patrol box set and then start expanding from there. They are a little bit variable faction to faction. The discounts tend to range somewhere between the 20% to 50% mark compared with the kits sold separately, and they might on average have around about 350 to 550 points in one of the boxes, maybe more if you get the Custodians one for example. In general, I'd say that these are quite solid boxes as well for the most part, some a little bit better than others, and they do have the advantage of being able to play the Force in a combat patrol game of Warhammer 40k as well, so I guess that's one added bonus there. Overall, here are just my rough thoughts on the starter sets in general. For people who just want to dip a toe in the Warhammer 40k hobby and just paint some miniatures without too much thought or investment and don't know where to start, things like the starter paint set or the introductory set are probably the ones that you'd like to go for first, I think. Otherwise, if you actually want to focus on getting a whole bunch of miniatures together to take some initial steps towards an army, I think the ones to go for are either the 40k starter set, the Combat Patrol box set for your individual faction, or perhaps the Leviathan box set if you can find one going. Finally, I think the Ultimate Starter Set is a bit of a mixed deal. You need to find enough value in both the terrain, the book, and the extra units to justify the extra cost compared with the regular starter sets. I think there's going to be enough value there to justify that for some people, but not necessarily for everyone. Overall, I feel like Games Workshop's done at least a fairly good job with these. None of them seem completely redundant, and they could be interesting depending on what sort of hobbyist you are. I think the established hobbyists are certainly going to gravitate towards the more miniature-focused ones, though. So anyway, let me know what you think of the 40k starter sets for 10th edition, which ones and why. As mentioned, if you did want to pick them up a little bit cheaper, Element Games in the UK tends to have 40k products at 15% off, the link's down in the video description there, and the same for Gap Games in Australia, often around about 20% off Warhammer releases there. Quite nice to get some discounts on things that already have savings compared with Games Workshop's things. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention as well that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that linked in the video description below. The Patreon is the main thing that supports the channel and keeps all these videos coming, so if you are enjoying quite a bit, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.